In the summer of 1839, the forests of East Texas were not a sanctuary, but a crucible. For 2 decades, they had been a refuge for a people driven from their ancestral homes, a nation seeking to build a new life in a new land. They were the Cherokee, and this was their last frontier. At their head was Duwali, known to the Texans as Chief Bulls. A man of mixed Scottish and Cherokee blood, he was a veteran of a lifetime of conflict and diplomacy, a leader who had guided his people across a continent in search of peace. The sword he carried was not a weapon of war, but a symbol of a promise, a gift from his friend, Sam Houston, the first president of the Republic of Texas. It was a promise of land, of sovereignty, of a permanent home. But in the Republic of Texas, promises were as fragile as the peace. A new president, with a new vision for Texas, had declared that promise void. Now, on the banks of the Neches River, Duwali and his people stood on the precipice of a final, desperate battle. The sword of friendship was about to be drawn in a war of extermination. This is the story of that broken promise, of a clash of empires, and of the brutal 2-day conflict that would erase the Cherokee Nation from the map of Texas forever. The Battle of the Neches. The story of the Texas Cherokee did not begin in Texas. It began generations earlier, in the shadow of the Great Smoky Mountains, the ancestral homeland of a powerful and sophisticated nation. Born around 1756 in North Carolina, Duwali was the son of a Scottish trader and a full-blooded Cherokee mother, a lineage that placed him between 2 worlds from birth. As a young man, he witnessed the relentless pressure of American expansion, a rising tide of settlers who coveted Cherokee land with an insatiable hunger. Unwilling to submit to U.S. authority and seeking to preserve their traditional way of life, Duwali and his band of Chickamauga Cherokee became part of a great westward migration. In the early 1810s, they crossed the Mississippi River, first settling in Missouri, then moving into Arkansas around 1812. But peace was fleeting. The same expansionist pressures they had fled soon followed them. By 1819, Duwali led his people south again, across the Red River and into the vast, sparsely populated territory of Spanish Texas. They settled first near the Trinity River, around the site of modern-day Dallas, but conflicts with the powerful Plains tribes pushed them eastward. They finally found a sanctuary in the wooded hills north of Nacogdoches, a region that felt like their old Appalachian home. Here, Duwali established a council that united several immigrant Cherokee villages, along with remnants of other displaced eastern tribes who had also sought refuge in Texas. They were not nomads. They were nation builders. They lived in log cabins, cultivated farms, raised livestock, and sold their surplus corn and Nacogdoches, becoming a stable and productive part of the East Texas landscape. As Texas moved toward revolution in 1835, the provisional government faced a precarious strategic situation. The Texan rebels were vastly outnumbered by the Mexican army, and an alliance between Mexico and the powerful Native American tribes in Texas could prove disastrous. Securing the neutrality of the Cherokee and their allies was a matter of survival for the fledgling republic. No one understood this better than Sam Houston, a former governor of Tennessee and a towering figure in the Revolution. Houston was also an adopted citizen of the Cherokee Nation, a man who had lived among them and considered Chief Bulls his friend and brother. Appointed as a commissioner to negotiate with the tribes, Houston, along with John Forbes, met with the council at Chief Bull's village. This treaty made and established between Sam Houston and John Forbes, commissioners, on the part of the Provisional Government of Texas of the one part, and the Cherokee and their associate bands now residing in Texas of the other part. On February 23, 1836, just days before the fall of the Alamo, they signed a formal treaty. The agreement was a landmark of diplomacy. It guaranteed the Cherokee and their 12 associate bands, the Shawnee, Delawares, Kickapoos, Quapaws, Choctaws, Biloxi's, Iowanis, Alabamas, Cochates, Caddos of the Neches, Tahutakes, and Unataquos, titled to a vast tract of land in East Texas, a permanent and legally recognized home. In exchange, the tribes would remain neutral in the war with Mexico. For Duwali, it was the culmination of 2 decades of searching for security for his people. The treaty explicitly named the allied tribes: Shawnee, Delawares, Kickapoos, Quapaws, Choctaws, Biloxis, Iowanis, Alabamas, Cochates, Caddos of the Neches, Tahutakes, and Unataquos. It created a formal, multi-tribal reservation, granting them the sovereignty they had sought for so long. With the treaty signed, the Cherokee kept their promise. They remained neutral, and the Republic of Texas was born. But the ink was barely dry when the political winds in Texas shifted. Sam Houston's successor as president was a man of a very different temperament and vision: Mirabeau Lamar, a poet, soldier, and ardent nationalist. Lamar dreamed of a Texan empire stretching to the Pacific, an empire built for and by the Anglo-American race. In his vision, there was no room for sovereign native nations. Lamar viewed Houston's conciliatory Indian policy as a weakness. He actively supported a policy of extermination and expulsion. One of his first acts was to address the treaty Houston had signed with the Cherokee. In a stunning act of bad faith, the Texas Senate, encouraged by Lamar's hostile rhetoric, refused to ratify the 1836 treaty, declaring it null and void. Public opinion, fanned by inflammatory newspaper editorials, quickly turned against the Cherokee. The Telegraph and Texas Register, the Republic's most influential paper, declared that war was now inevitable and called for a decisive military campaign to penetrate the very heart of the Comanche country, lumping all tribes together as a singular, savage enemy. The Texas Land Office, which Houston had kept closed, was reopened, and a flood of new land titles were issued to white settlers directly on the lands promised to the Cherokee. The Cherokees' very way of life became a threat to this new vision of Texas. They were not nomadic raiders who could be pushed further west. They were farmers with permanent villages, log cabins, and cultivated fields. Their success in adopting an Anglo-American model of settled agriculture made them a permanent fixture on the land, an immovable obstacle to the relentless expansion envisioned by Lamar. Their desire for legal title and peaceful coexistence was a direct challenge to the Texan creed of exclusive Anglo-Saxon destiny. The more civilized they became, the greater the threat they posed to a republic that had already decided they did not belong. The stage was set for a conflict that Lamar did not merely anticipate, but actively sought. All he needed was a reason. In August of 1838, a year before the final battle, that reason began to emerge. In the area around Nacogdoches, a hotbed of political intrigue, a group of discontented Tejanos, Texans of Mexican descent, rose in a brief and ultimately futile revolt against the Republic of Texas. Led by Vicente Cordoba, a respected local official who remained loyal to Mexico, the rebels sought to challenge the new Anglo-dominated government that they felt was usurping their rights and lands. Cordoba knew he could not succeed alone. He reached out to the native tribes, hoping to forge a broad alliance. While most tribes remained wary, some disaffected warriors, including a few Cherokee, joined his cause, swelling his ranks to an estimated 400 men. News of an armed force moving toward the Cherokee Nation sent shockwaves through the Texan government. The response from Texan leaders was divided and revealed the deep fracture in the Republic's Indian policy. President Sam Houston, then in Nacogdoches, trusted Chief Bulls's assurances of neutrality and ordered his commanders to avoid provoking the Cherokee. But Major General Thomas J. Rusk, the commander of the Nacogdoches militia, distrusted the Cherokee deeply. Defying Houston's direct orders, Rusk marched his troops across the Angelina River directly toward Bulls's main village, determined to make a show of force. The rebellion itself quickly fizzled out. Rusk's forces, along with other militia, easily defeated the rebels near Seguin, and Cordoba fled to Mexico. Rusk, after meeting with native leaders who disavowed any knowledge of the uprising, returned to Nacogdoches. President Houston, accepting the Cherokee leadership's word, took no further action against them. For a moment, the crisis had seemed to pass, but the seeds of suspicion had been sown, and they would soon bear bitter fruit. The Cordoba rebellion had failed, but its echoes would prove more dangerous than the uprising itself. In the months that followed, Texan forces captured or killed several Mexican agents attempting to incite the tribes. On their bodies, they found the proof that Mirabeau Lamar had been waiting for. In August 1838, a diary found on the body of Mexican agent Julian Pedro Miracle explicitly detailed a visit to Chief Bulls and an agreement to make war against the Texans. Then, in May 1839, Texas Rangers ambushed another party led by Agent Manuel Flores. Among the dead were several Cherokee from Bowles' own village. On Flores' body were letters from Mexican officials addressed directly to Chief Bowles, encouraging a campaign of harassment against Texan settlers. For President Lamar, this was the final, irrefutable evidence of a grand conspiracy. His long-held suspicions, he declared, were now reduced to absolute proof. Sam Houston continued to defend his friend, arguing that Bowles was being framed and that the documents were part of a Mexican plot to sow chaos. But Houston was no longer in power. Lamar's hostile policy, which had been his intention from the start, now had the veneer of legitimacy. It was no longer a war of conquest. It was a preemptive strike against treason. The documents were not the cause of the war, but they became its public justification, the pretext Lamar needed to unleash the full military force of the Republic against the Cherokee. In July 1839, Lamar dispatched a commission to deliver his ultimatum to Chief Bowles. The commissioners were not men of peace. They were Lamar's hardline allies, including Secretary of War Albert Sidney Johnston. They were backed by an army of 500 Texan soldiers under the command of General Kelsey H. Douglas, who camped just 6 miles from the Cherokee villages. The terms were simple and brutal. The Cherokee and their 12 allied bands were to leave Texas immediately. They would be paid for their crops and improvements, but not for the land itself, the land that had been guaranteed to them in a treaty with the Republic. You are between two fires. If you remain, you will be destroyed. Go in peace, and you will be saved. But go you must, peaceably if you will, forcibly if we must. The Cherokee Council debated for 2 days. They agreed to leave, but refused to sign a treaty that required them to be marched out under armed guard, a deep dishonor. Chief Bowles made one final desperate plea. If I fight, the whites will kill me. If I refuse to fight, my own people will kill me. Can the president's demand be postponed until we gather our crops? His request was denied. The Texans gave their final warning. Those willing to accept the terms should display a white flag. When no flag appeared on the morning of July 15th, the army began to march. As the Texan army advanced on July 15, 1839, they found the main Cherokee town abandoned. Chief Bowles, anticipating the attack, had begun a desperate evacuation, hoping to lead his people to safety across the Neches River. The Texans, commanded in the field by General Thomas J. Rusk, pursued them relentlessly. Late in the afternoon, a few miles west of modern-day Tyler, the Texan vanguard caught up with the Cherokee rearguard. A sharp firefight erupted. The Cherokee warriors fought fiercely to buy time for their families to escape. As the sun set over the East Texas pines, the first day's battle ended in a stalemate. The Texans had lost 3 men, with 5 wounded. 18 Cherokee warriors had been killed. Under the cover of darkness, the Cherokee slipped away, continuing their retreat northward. For the Texans, it was a frustrating and indecisive engagement. For the Cherokee,
It was a brief respite before the final catastrophic blow. The morning of July 16th dawned with grim certainty. General Rusk and Colonel Edward Burleson pressed the pursuit, their scouts fanning out across the landscape. They soon located the main body of the Cherokee and their allies, the Delaware, Shawnee, and Kickapoo, who had taken up a defensive position in a ravine near the headwaters of the Neches River in what is now Van Zandt County. The combined native force numbered between 700 and 800 warriors, but they were encumbered by their women and children. The Texans charged across the open ground, facing a volley of fire from the ravine. The fighting was desperate and at times hand-to-hand, but the Texans' superior numbers and firepower began to tell. The native line broke, and the warriors fell back into the dense thicket of the Neches River bottom, making a final, chaotic stand. In the midst of the chaos, the 83-year-old Chief Bowles remained a figure of defiant courage. He rode along the battle line, rallying his warriors with a sword given to him by Sam Houston in one hand and a flag in the other. His horse was shot from under him. Wounded in the thigh, he dismounted and began to walk away from the fighting. Shot a second time, he could go no further. He sat down on the battlefield, facing his enemies as they approached. A Texan captain dismounted, placed a pistol to the old chief's head, and fired. The last great chief of the Texas Cherokee was dead. With his death, the resistance shattered completely. It was a slaughter. An estimated 100 Native Americans were killed that day, including Chief Big Mush. The Texans suffered only 5 dead and 28 wounded. The battle was over, but the war against the Cherokee people was not. What followed was not a military pursuit, but a campaign of systematic destruction. A scorched earth policy designed to ensure the Cherokee could never return. In his official report, Brigadier General Kelsey H. Douglas described the operation with chilling clarity. For 10 days, Texan soldiers swept through the Cherokee lands. They burned several villages and over 200 acres of ripe corn, destroying the Cherokees' entire winter food supply. This was Texas's own Trail of Tears, a brutal echo of the forced removal of the southeastern tribes that was happening at the very same time. The United States Army was marching the main body of the Cherokee Nation to Indian Territory, and now the Army of the Republic of Texas was chasing the last free Cherokee to that same destination. The survivors of the Neches, men, women, and children, were hunted across East Texas, chased north across the Red River into Indian Territory, what is now Oklahoma. There they arrived as destitute refugees, seeking shelter among their kinsmen who had just endured their own forced march. The reception they received is lost to history, but they joined a nation fractured and traumatized, its political leadership divided by the very treaty that had led to the removal. But not all the survivors fled north. A small band seeking refuge in Mexico attempted a perilous journey south along the fringe of the Texan frontier. This group was led by Chief Egg and John Bolles Jr., the son of the slain chief. On Christmas Day, 1839, their tragic journey came to an end. Near the mouth of the San Saba River, they were intercepted by a force of Texan soldiers commanded by Colonel Edward Burleson, one of the victors of the Neches. There was no mercy. John Bolles Jr., Chief Egg, and their few remaining warriors were killed. 27 women and children were taken captive. It was the final brutal act in the expulsion of the Cherokee from Texas.